This is where we were last week. We have, right now we just have a slider that makes this wheel spin right here. And there's some problems with the way this wheel works, like I think we got to adjust the font size slightly. See how there's kind of a gap between 9 and 0. But right now everything's just being controlled by this slider, and we don't have any automatic system of making the wheel turn. All right, where am I in my notes? Yeah, does everybody have that? Yeah? Okay, great. Cool. All right, so let me see. Let's start with just fixing the text issue with this. So I'm going to rotate my wheel, and here we go. Here's somebody. What was your name? Marshall. Actually, okay, Marshall's here. Okay, great. So I need to go inside, I believe, in this wheel. Actually, let's do a split view. So remember this pane layout up here? You can do a split view, and then you can go inside of a container on one side and be outside of it on another side, which is really handy. So have a split view, and I'm going to go ahead and center my view of the wheel on this side, and I'm going to dive inside of wheel 1 on this side. And what I need to adjust is this text. Open up parameters by hitting the P key. I'm going to grab my mouse, actually. Didn't I bring it down here? Yes.
I think currently what we have it set on right now is, yeah, it's 22.5.
22.5. So if I adjust this, so that's too much. And I use, come on, mouse, wake up. Connected, there we go. And I use the value ladder is probably the easiest thing to do. Which, remember, to do the value ladder, you click and hold, and this is a lot easier with a mouse than trying to use your trackpad. Then you drag down to what kind of increment you want, and then left and right sets that. And so I can very finely drag this over till I get something that looks good, and it looks more like 23.
I got 23.1.
23. I don't know. I think 23.4 looks good. Let me see what 23.1 looks like. Actually, that's not too bad, but I think that's a little bit of a space. I think maybe 23.25 looks pretty good to me as far as spacing between 9 and 0.
Well, currently that's my spacing on centering of my 0.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Well, I mean, what I'm looking at is the spacing between 9 and 0.
Oh, okay.
Making it be even. Right. You know, where your 0 is centered also has to do with what your current rotation is on that wheel. Okay, so once you get that kind of fixed, let's see. The next thing we need to do is what is it? Is to make this wheel drive automatically. And actually, let's do this first. Let's put it in the slot machine first. Right now, I don't even see this thing. It's looking fairly terrible. Let me get out of the split pane and get into a single pane. And let's get this. So if I hit this open viewer, I can have a small window showing me what the performance mode will look like, but while still being in the editor. Yes.
What do you do if it touches on your crashes computer?
You open it again and you save often.
Yeah, it's definitely saved and all. Actually, the only problem is that it's like preventing me from shutting it off now.
What do you mean?
It's as though like all the commands are just disabled.
Can you close Touch Designer and reopen it?
It doesn't want to close. I'm going to be force quitted. Quit down here.
Yeah, can you force quit?
What's the key one?
Up here in the here on the Apple, go to force quit. Choose Touch Designer. Say force quit. There you go. Try running it again.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So Touch Designer can be, my computer seems to do pretty well on it. Some people's computers are nothing but problems with touch. If you have one of those, and just in general, save early, save often, right? It's going to give you these incremental saves. If you look up here where it says Touch Designer 20, that's not it. Sorry. If you look here, slot machine class 2020.2.to, right? I just saved this on a thing called slot machine class 2020. Every time I save it, so right now it says .2. If I save it, it says .3, .4, .5. If you open up slot machine class or whatever you named your slot machine class 2020 or just slot machine without the .3, you just open the one that's just called whatever you called it. It will automatically open the most recent one. So if it's .3, it'll open up the .3. But it does all these iterative saves just in case you made a bunch of stuff and then it broke and you have no idea how it broke. You can go back and open up, well, I'm going to open up .2 because it was working back then, and then go from there. And you can save as something else and try to figure out. Or the other thing that might happen is you do some sort of Python code that breaks the thing really badly and causes it to crash the minute it opens up. That might be another reason why you wouldn't want it to be where you'd want to open the .3 or the .4 or whatever earlier version before you put in that bad Python code, right? Okay. Okay, so what were we doing? Oh, we were going to put the wheel inside of the slot machine. So right now, I have a wheel. I believe it's not set to render. There it is. So when I click the render flag down here, you can see that there's something there that got added to the side of my slot machine, but I believe this wheel is like, I think the camera is in the middle of the wheel right now, and the wheel is gigantic. So we need to change the size of this wheel first of all, and then position it so that it's inside of the slot machine. So open the parameters on your wheel 1, and first thing is scale. I believe we want to set the uniform scale here to something like 0.104 is what I had in my notes. .105, that's pretty close. Let me turn the render back on. Hey, there it is. Right, so uniform scale uniformly scales on the X, the Y, and the Z. And I think it's about 0.105. Right now it looks too big, but that's because it's too far forward on the Z plane. We need to back it up so it's inside the machine. And when we back it up, it'll automatically seem to get smaller on the screen, just like something that's further away from you is smaller than something that's closer to you. Right? So then we need to adjust the translate here in the Z, and I believe it's something like negative 0.22 from what I have in my notes. So I'm using the value ladder. And you see how I want it to be behind this center post. You can see that center post is getting clipped in there. So it's at 0.22, it's right behind that center post. Okay, so now it's inside the machine. It's a little off center. Let's go ahead and move it to the left. So now I've set a scale. I've set a Z translate. I think the Y translate is probably fine. I don't need to move it. I can leave that at 0. But I need to change the X. So let me change that using the value ladder. And I could do it here in the middle, but we're going to end up putting 3, and this is wheel 1, so we want it to be on the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and keep moving it until it's over on the left-hand side, which is something like negative 0.14. Okay? Yeah.
Oh my
So
God,
just make sure your render flag over here is turned on.
You'll get there, don't worry.
I'm not gonna get there. My computer's.
Sorry, I was.
No problem.
Good.
Oh,
It's not
do
gonna
you
work
have
today.
it? Not have a slot
I
machine
might
in
as
there?
well leave
I
class
remember
at this
we
point.
put it in class. Yeah, I just remember.
It's for the encouragement though.
Yeah, of course.
Where are you? Oh, there it is. Wait, scroll over there. All right, scroll over. All right, so there's a problem in that. What's click on the error. What does the error say?
Seems-
Or X, yeah.
Yeah.
So it
Right now,
says,
I'm
whoops.
just trying to figure out
There's,
why mine says
node with errors
288.
inside cannot read the file slot machine.
I think my project was on the
So
computer.
do you not have the file? Did you delete the file?
No,
I
Oh, there you go. You moved the file.
Should I just?
Oh, we have this.
So you want to,
Yeah.
yeah, try just dragging it in. No,
Like,
let's see. Go back and go inside. Go into the parameters for that. Yeah, go over there. There, that.
and this is all it has.
So geometry file here.
Maybe it's working.
Try to, yeah. Now pick it from wherever you put it.
That is so strange.
There. That should
So I should
Deleted it all.
Yeah, it's
Wait,
really
is it still not working?
Well, you probably want to stay with
Now
that.
click on that error. Where does it say? Unable to read file.
Yeah, I guess. I don't even know. I should be here right now.
Okay, go ahead and delete this and drag it in there from your thing.
We've only created
No.
one.
Go back inside because you want to keep all the other settings about where it is. Wait, do you have two? You have two. Oh, just get rid of that one. There you go. Now turn on the render flag for this one.
I couldn't help you. I'm sorry.
No.
There you go. There you go. Scroll out.
What are, can I see the
So now you have to. Did you not set the?
What's the number?
Okay, so on this, you want that to be
Yeah.
on the slot machine. It needs to be translated to -1 on the Y. Yep, just translate it to -1. Yep, I don't know where if your camera is not in the right spot or something, but
I think it's.
okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, what do you have on that dial on your wheel? Do you have a different like font style or something? Your font looks weird. Okay. So then just make sure that your font, your wheel 1 has something like that. Those values over there: -0.14, 0, -0.22.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So I got everything right going far so far, but
Mhm.
I now noticed that even with the same Python expression that you have up there, I have a -288 and you have -273.
That just has to do with where my slider is, because that's getting
okay.
controlled by your slider position.
Oh, okay.
If
Yeah.
it's perfect.
What? Looks good? Okay, great. Hello. What's your name again? What? Wendy. Okay, so Wendy and Marshall are both here. Okay, great. Yes.
At first, like showing like the thing, but it's showing the camera, but it's not showing the video.
So then you have the wrong render flag set. So which thing is it? The wheel. Right? Go inside the wheel. You need to
What happened to
uncheck the tube 1 render flag.
When does it not? When does it not?
It's because you're rendering both things. So you're
Command
rendering the
save.
untextured thing and you're rendering the textured thing, and it's kind of a crapshoot as to which one's on top. And the unrendered is has to do is on by is kind of randomly on top of the one that's textured, so you're not seeing.
Thank God, man. Save it.
It's
Okay.
It's the way it is.
So is yours working?
He found his.
It's so weird. Like it erased the file, then I realized I had it in some really weird location on my computer for some reason. So
Oh, okay.
now I'm just really behind.
Oh, wait. How? What do you mean you're really behind? What you had last week is
Oh,
not what you have now.
No, I have everything. I have to translate things now.
Oh, okay.
To where we are.
Okay. Okay. Great. Does anybody else have any issues? We can try to let him get his translated. So it's just the translation of the wheel.
I translated it to point to negative.
Negative 0.14, 0, negative 0.22.
Negative.
Yeah. And, scale, uniform scale 0.105.
Where?
Yep.
Uniform scale, 0.105. Otherwise, it'll be too big.
And is there one more step before we duplicate these?
There's going to be a couple steps. We're going to stick on one wheel until we get it
Perfect.
mostly built.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we'll end up having to change a whole bunch of stuff for wheels 2 and 3. You good?
Yeah, my only question actually before we move on to the next part is why my camera is rendering at this bizarre angle.
So then, where's your camera?
Right.
Click on your camera and bring the parameters up. Okay, you're at a weird pivot. Do you have a look at target? Cam target, yeah. Translate. Okay, so here, why don't you just copy my camera parameters? So there you go.
Oh,
Set your pivot back to 0 on your camera.
everything really back to 0.
Yeah, and just translate it .03, 0.031, and just look at cam target, and that should fix it. You already have looking at cam target, so just put these back to 0.03. You get rid of your pivot. I don't know what the.
Yeah, I got rid of it.
And then, what's going on now? It's got some sort of.
It's got an.
What does it say? Unable to calculate look at. The up vector is likely parallel at the look at direction. So do you have your cam target thing probably has looking at itself? No.
Look at camera.
No, you don't want the cam target null to be looking at anything. It just needs to be where it is. All right, so go back to your camera here. And there's got to be something weird about it.
I think you need to change the position.
Try adjusting your camera, your position slightly. What do you have? You have 1.
Oh, it's 1.
It can't figure out where to look because it's sitting right in the middle of the target.
Oh.
So you have it at negative. You need to have that at 1. A z depth of 1.
See.
And now we're
Still white.
still white. What's going on? Something must be huge.
Yeah.
What's the? Because I was trying to look at hers, and then it was like there was a different for your camera. It's like 0.03, 0.03, and 1.
Yeah.
But for your camera target itself, it's like 0.03, 0.07, and 0.
Right. Yes. Check your camera target stuff.
You're
That's right.
0.2.
And that's what it should be. 0.0. The camera target where the camera is pointing should be at 0.03, 0.07, and 0.
Yes.
The camera itself needs to be at a z depth of 1
Yes.
so that it's pushed back a little bit, right? For now, go to your camera and try it. What happens when we push your camera back further? So change the translate to back to 5 on the Z. Oh, it's the wheel. You have your wheel. So go back to 1. Change that back to 1. Okay, and then you just need to go in and figure out which one of your wheels has the wrong scale. So you have 1.05 on your uniform scale, and it's supposed to be like 0.105 or something like that.
Oh, makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, 0.105.
Wow. Okay.
All right? You better? All right.
Yeah.
Yes, Camila, what's up?
It's in place now.
Not happening.
And Kathleen had to be sick today. All right. So move your camera back, and maybe we can figure out what's going on. So your camera, change that to like 5 on the Z translate.
That's just saying where it's
Z.
whenever it has
That's
text,
X, that's
it
why
renders like
that's the
a
Z.
respawn
Change that to like
actually
5.
marker.
Oh, okay.
It's
So
like
what
it's
is
really
huge?
weird.
Oh, looks like
I don't know
your
where that could be from.
It's
your
numbers
slot
up
machine
there?
isn't moved down.
really
So in your slot machine container that has your slot machine in it, where is that? Your yeah, that should be. You scroll out of that. We don't need to be inside of it. There we go. Slot machine should be at translate a -1 on the Y. -1. Yep. What happened? I don't know. There you go. Yes? Yours is close. You just need to move your wheel over. And your wheel is the wrong size.
Because there's space 1 for
Oh, because yeah, you gotta have all of those at 1, and you're just doing the uniform scale. And now move it back, translate it back. Here, I'll go over to the wheel. It's open right now. So translated -0.14, 0, -0.22. Anybody else need help? Good? All right. I think we may all be on the same page now. Yeah? Okay. Woo! All right. Moving on. Okay. So we got that. Right now we are just controlling this wheel by this little slider, right? And that's not what we want. We're not going to let the player set their own wheel rotation. They just all set it to 7s and hit the handle and win. We need these wheels to drive themselves, right? So right now, it's being controlled by this slider. The slider creates a value that goes from 0 to 1. And then we do some math on that to make it go from 1 to 10. And then we multiply that by like 36 degrees and add an offset of 72 to make the wheel turn, right? But we want a system that will automatically make a number that goes from 0 to 1 and then back to 0 and to 1, back to 0 to 1. And there is definitely an object like that. Does anybody know what it is? It's a chop. And what? We're making this wheel turn itself.
The math is already attached.
No, it's not a math. Good guess. It's an LFO. Does anybody know what an LFO is? Amy should know.
Low frequency oscillator.
That's right. Have you ever worked with LFOs, Amy? Yeah, you use them in synthesizers, right? And they make, what do? They make like sine waves, right?
I've worked with the algos that could generate different styles.
Yeah. So yes, and there are different styles on this. Like its default is a sine, but you can also have triangle, which is a common one that you see in synthesizers. And a low frequency oscillator, traditionally it was a piece of hardware, and it would create an electric signal that would go from a negative voltage through 0 to a positive voltage, back to 0 to a negative voltage. And that had all kinds of applications, but mostly you see them in hardware for synthesizers or rack mount, rack gear and stuff like that. But in our case, this is just creating a a number that's going in a sine wave from -1 to +1. And if I were to patch this into the math, it wants to create its own channel. We don't want to do that. Undo that. Disconnect this. And then patch it into the math. And now it's actually making the wheel, it's going way too fast to see what's going on. Let's go ahead and slow down the frequency here. And you can see it's making the wheel go back and forth from 0 to 0. Right? And that's not what we want. We want it to rotate one direction. And there is a mode to do that, and it's called ramp. And if I set this to ramp, it'll just spin. It may be spinning really fast. That has to do with your frequency. So
in the parameters.
Set the frequency to like 0.2, put like 0.5. Right?
But instead of sine, I put ramp.
Yeah, change the type from sine to ramp.
Frequency to
0.5. Right? And so now we have a wheel that's spinning. So how could we make this wheel start spinning and then stop spinning? There's two different ways you could do it. The first way is this play key, right? I can hit the play off and it stops, hit the play on and it starts. But what we're going to want to do on this, and you could probably program a way to just operate it that way and it would totally work, especially because this is scriptable. Like if I hit the plus, it's called the .par.play, and you either send it a 1 or a 0 and it'll be on or off. But we're going to want it to like speed up and then slow down. And so the other way that you can make it go and stop is by adjusting the frequency. So 0.5 frequency is this speed. 1.0 is like a much faster speed. And you can go all the way to 0, which is stopped. So if you send it a 0 in the frequency, it's going to stop. If you send it a 0.5, it's going to start, and it's going to go at that speed. We're going to want to be able to create like random speeds for it so that each wheel is spinning a slightly different speed. And we're also going to want to create a system that does some sort of timer that after the time that chooses a random amount of time to elapse, and after that elapsed time is done, then it'll turn it off, right? So there's an object called timer, and that's what we're going to start with for now. We don't need this slider anymore. Let's go ahead and delete the slider. We won't be using that. Go ahead and create a, here, I'm going to actually save as on mine. Save as, and I'm going to call this class 6 2020 Yes, I'm going to replace it. Okay, so now I'm going to create a timer, and it's a chop also. And timer, if you look at the parameters for a timer, you have this start button, which starts it, and it does a fraction. It has one channel called timer fraction, which is basically the percentage of time that the timer is counting. So if it's at 0.5%, or if it's at 0.5, this fraction, that means it's halfway through its timer. How far halfway through its timer is depends on the length of the timer, which is another parameter here called length. By default, that's 10 seconds. So 0.5 would be 5 seconds, 0.6 would be 6 seconds, and so on, right? But if this was 0.2, if this was 2 seconds, then 0.5 would be 1 second, right? It's a fraction based on what the length is. We actually won't be using that channel. It's definitely useful for some things. It's not useful for our purposes. What we really want, what do you think? Which channel do you think we want? There's 3 of them here. There's the timer fraction. There's the ready, which only gets sent a 1 when you hit the initialize button. And then there's another channel called done. Yeah, done. Because we care about what we care about when that timer is elapsed, and that done channel flips from 0 to 1 when the timer elapses. So we want to isolate out that channel. We could probably code around just using this channel, like we could refer to the timer op timer 1 and then channel 2, open bracket 2, close bracket, or open bracket, single quote, done, single quote, close bracket. That would refer to this channel. But it's a lot easier, especially for beginners, to just use another chop to separate out the channel that you want and then refer to that. Plus, we're going to do some other things that just makes it a lot better to do it that way. So go ahead, and we want to select that channel. And we can do that with an object called select, a select chop. Close this for a second. Okay, so select chop, these look exactly the same, but that's because here on the parameters it's saying channel name star, meaning it's looking at all channel names. We only want to look at one channel name. So I could type in the done channel, but it's easier just to hit this arrow in the corner and choose what channel I want to look at, in this case done. And so now it's selected out that channel. And if I go back to the timer parameters,
I just got my select one.
So get your select and then go to where it says channel names, click on this arrow in the corner, and you're selecting done, because that's the channel that we want to select.
Channel names, and then I'm selecting
done.
Well, there's just an asterisk.
Yeah, you want to change it from an asterisk, go to this arrow in the corner, and select done. Whoops. Done. There we go. Okay, so then go back to the timer and go ahead and let's change this length in seconds to something more manageable for us to play around with, like 4. And now go ahead and hit start. And you can see that channel goes from 0 to 1 when the timer elapses. How could we use that to set the frequency on the LFO? Anybody want to venture a guess?
I'm running into a problem, but you could just have the playback speed
Mhm.
listen to the selected channel and then have it be set at 0.
Yeah, so we could export it. That's what somebody else had said too. Right. What's wrong? Is something broken?
Yeah, it was.
Are you just on the select or on the timer?
Honest, I tried to do a select, but the select just broke everything.
So then just make sure on your select here, look at my parameters. So make sure that your timer is connected to your select and that the channel names that you have done selected as the channel names.
Yeah, I have that, but and then if I put, let's see, I could use. Oh wait, I got it connected to that.
What? You have it connected to something else? You shouldn't have it. You shouldn't have the output of it connected to anything at this point.
I took it off, but it's not. And my channel name says done, and then my chop is empty, and then I don't have anything else. But when I press start, the timer doesn't change anything.
Even do you see the word done in a 0 or a 1?
No, I hate that.
Okay, well then just make a new one. Just delete it. Right click on the output of your timer 1 and then select. Then choose select from your chop menu.
I think no, it's fine.
And now then on your channel names, click the arrow over here, Amy. So I've created a new one, and by default it has all of the channels. And then I want to right here, look at this little arrow right here on the corner. I want to click on that and choose the done channel.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I just recreated the new one.
There we go. Okay, cool. So I'm sure you had something messed up, but sometimes it's easier just to make a new thing than to try to figure out what you had messed up. All right. So what Amy and I think somebody over here to my left had said was to go ahead and export this channel to the LFO's frequency. So let's do that. Make it active, drag it to the frequency, and don't choose export chop, and instead let's choose chop reference because we're going to probably do some math to this thing. I almost always do chop reference rather than exporting chops because I almost always want to like adjust the value with some math or something like that or some Python code. All right. So you can either type it out like this, select 1 channel done, or I can make the select active and drag it into the field like that. And then select chop reference. Okay? Cool. So now this is doing something. It's not doing the right thing because it's going and stops when we hit the timer and then starts going again when the timer elapses, which is the opposite of what we want, right? So how could we make this opposite? There's 2 different ways you could do it, which are basically the same way. You're flipping it over, right? How do you flip it over mathematically?
Inverse?
No, that wouldn't do it, I don't think. So let's try that. Let me say negative. I'm putting parentheses around this value. And now it just goes the other direction. Right? That doesn't help us. That's just making the frequency a -1 instead of the frequency +1.
Wait, I thought we were
No, we're not changing the direction, we're changing the state. So right now, it's running when the timer is stopped, and when I start the timer, it stops. We want it to instead, when I start the timer, run, and when the timer stops, it stops. Right? So right now, basically what's happening right now is it's sending a 0, which equates to stop on the LFO when the timer is active. And it sends a 1, which is the LFO running when the timer is stopped. How do I flip that over so that it sends a 0 when the timer is, or starts a 1 when the timer is running and a 0 when the timer is stopped. It's a really simple math thing, but people have a little bit trouble visualizing it. I remember when I coded this, it took me about 5 minutes of thinking before I figured it out. No, it's not a divide. It's not a division. So all it is we want it to be the opposite. So we want it to be when this channel done is 1, we want it to be 0. So what do you have to do to 1 to make it 0? Okay, we can multiply by 0, but then they'd both be 0, right? Because 0 times 0 is 0, and 1 times 0 is 0. So then it would never run.
Subtract 1.
Subtract 1. So 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. We could say subtract 1 and then multiply by negative 1, because negative 0 is the same thing as 0. That would work, but there's an even easier way. It's simply the value that it's sending. It's 1 minus the value that it's sending. Because 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. Right? What?
And it's kind of like, it's only 2 possible values.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of
It's 1 minus the value that it's sending. So I could say, right here, all I'd have to do is say 1 minus op select yada, yada, yada. Right? And that totally works.
Wait, did you put a space before your dash?
You don't have to. You can. I did for clarity, but you can just have it this way, I believe, and it works the same. Okay? So now when I hit go, when I hit start, that LFO starts running, and when the timer ends, the LFO stops, right? Is everybody, I see some stink faces. Is anybody else having problems?
Is this working right?
Huh? That's right. It's working. Hit start. Hit start. Yeah, yours is working.
Amazing.
Is anybody not working? All right. Cool. Oh, Amy. You're breaking my heart. Okay, there's one other way you could do this, which basically means the same thing. And in C#, you would do this with an exclamation point. And it's the not. It means 1 equals not 1, which means 1 equals 0, and 0 equals not 0 means 0 equals 1. So it basically means true equals false and false equals true. And it's called a negation. And in C# or C or Arduino, you do that with an exclamation point. In Python, though, you actually just use the word not. So if I said not op, which is really confusing to some people, but when you get used to programming it, you'll see this you see this all the time. Not op. It just basically means the negation of this. Whatever this says, do the opposite of it. Right? It's like the petulant child of code. Right? And that would work the exact same way. Right? But so you could say not, right? I'm going to go ahead and put it back to 1 minus just because that's like more clear for people what the hell's going on.
One question is right. So Python in that way is different than
Just using the word not is different.
or like that kind of negation that you can do in C# you can do it in
You can do in any programming language. Negation is a common programming paradigm. Because a lot of times you'll want the state to do the positive thing in one case and the negative in something else, where hitting one button wants to turn on this light and turn off that light, and then hitting the button again wants to turn on this light and that off that light, and all you can say is light equals button state on this one, light equals not button state on the other one. Then it's like left, right, left, right, left, right. Make sense?
and all the language of C# is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that negation in C# is an exclamation point. In Python, it's called not. But you could also, in C# do this, 1 minus the state. Works the same way as the negation, right? As long as your states are zeros and ones. right? Which most times you're dealing with a state change. It's either 0 or 1. Now, if it's 0.2 and 0.4, then 1 minus 0.2 and 1 minus 0.4 are not the opposite of each other, right? But in this case, it works, right? Okay. But as long as you're dealing with a Boolean, a true or a false always equals 1 and 0 in computer science.
Boolean
Right?
always gets me confused because I'm used to 3D shapes.
Well,
Boolean
just
objects.
whenever if a Boolean true and false gets you confused, just think of it as a 0 and a 1, because that's all it is. It's 1 or 0. It's binary, on or off, 0, 1, true or false, right? Okay, so 1 minus op, select yada yada yada. Okay, cool. So now we have a timer. Do we still have a button? Or we never had a button? No, we didn't make a button. Make a button. Comp button. Attach a null to the output of this button. Right? Change the mode of the button from toggle down to momentary.
What did you say to do before momentary?
What? Here on the button type, momentary.
Well, yeah.
Oh, add a
before that.
null to it
Oh,
on the
okay.
output of it. So we can actually see that value. Then go ahead and make your viewer active on the button. When I click the button, that's a 1. When I let go of the button, it's a 0. If I patch that in, there's 2 inputs on this timer, and one of them is initialize trigger, which means reset the timer. If it's currently running, then reset it back to 0 and have it still run. We're not going to use that. We just want this start trigger. So patch it into start trigger, the second input on the timer. Now if I click the button, it should run. And the wheel should spin. So if I open my viewer, I got my little button down here. I click the button and the wheel spins.
How do I open the viewer again? I'm sorry.
It's that little square icon right here.
Open viewer. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then the button.
Should be down in the bottom
But
corner.
then my things aren't in there for some reason.
What things?
Because over here, like they loaded it
Mhm.
and everything. But when I go into the button,
Not inside the button.
okay.
Hit the viewer. There's your button. Click. Oh, I don't know where your things
I
went.
don't know.
Something, you have a render flag not turned on
Okay,
somewhere.
so maybe
So what do you got?
render to here,
This is not rendering. Oh wait, that's a cam.
render here.
No, that's not it. No.
not
It's
it.
this wheel is not
It's
being
not
rendered.
Okay.
So try it now. See, now I see it. Go
Okay.
ahead and hit the viewer now. Square. There you go. Hit the button. There you go. Okay? Yes?
Couldn't feel more proud.
This is why we're going to have to do the video as
I
homework.
broke,
Okay.
like it works, but it seems like it's not referencing, but it is.
That's because we've made a reference through Python. We haven't drawn any line between the two.
But it doesn't. Don't you supposed to? I'm supposed to have the gray one that's like showing like it's like referencing it.
Not necessarily. Let me see. Does mine have a little gray line?
Like between auto and select.
Yeah, there should be a gray line there. I don't know why you don't have one, but it works anyway. Maybe because your viewer is active? No, I don't know.
It's okay.
Doesn't matter as long as it works. Okay, it feels to me like a little bug. Like if you saved, closed, and reopened, it would probably be back the way it should be. Okay,
Quick question.
Yes.
The bottom should be in toggle up.
no, momentary.
Not in-
Yeah. All right, so now we got a button. It makes it spin. But we don't have any randomness, right? It's going to spin for the same amount of time each time and stop. So at 4 seconds, that's almost like a perfect certain number of rotations, like four rotations or 5 rotations or something like that, a little bit less. So we need to add randomness to this amount of time that it spins. We also need to add randomness to the speed that it spins, but let's start first with the time that it spins. Okay? So here under timer, there is a parameter called length. So we need to execute some code that generates a random number and puts that in the length field and execute that code when the button is pressed, or when this 0 here turns to a 1, right? There's a thing called there's a DAT called a chop execute DAT. And this is one of the most common objects that you'll use in Touch Designer to execute code, because you usually execute code during state changes. And this is the one that's like designed to execute code during state changes. So when things flip from 0 to 1, or when things flip from 1 to 0, or when numbers are moving. Those are all state changes, and it has all of those here. It has off to on, while on to off, while off, and during value change. Its default is a value change. I use it most often on off to on. I think it should be the default, should be this first one. And that's the way we're going to use it. So go ahead and turn that on and turn off value change. We will do some value changes later, probably next week. But for now, we're just wanting it to execute when we get an off to on. So currently this null2 coming out of the button is a 0, meaning it's off. When you click it, it will be going from off to on. So it will execute when we make this association. Let's go ahead and make this association. So here, chop, it says what chop do you want to look at? We're going to look at null2, or whatever your null attached to your button is called.
Null2.
Okay.
Do you have the viewer active on your button right now?
On the button, yeah,
Okay.
so that you can click it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to
Great,
click
yeah,
it.
I tried clicking it and it wasn't,
All right, so now when we click it, it will run any code that's inside of this, where it's there. If you look inside your chop execute, or I might call it a chop exec because it's easier to say that. If you make this chop exec active, you can add code to it. Right now, there's no code in it, other than some empty definitions. So you see all these def on, off to on. Which I don't know why they use the word on before it. It just confuses the hell out of people, but it's saying on this condition, on the off to on condition, then, right, on, off to on, right? No, so just ignore this first on, right? Then you can see it says off to on. So on off to on, then do everything after the colon before the word return. While on, do everything after the colon before the word return. On to off, same thing. While on. So we need to put in code on a new line after this colon before the word return. And another thing that I think is a little awkward about this program is it doesn't automatically indent for you. It puts it over here on the far left. If you put code there, Python will get mad at you and break. Make sure you put a tab. The reason why is because you'll notice that if you've ever done any other kind of coding, like for Arduino or C#, something like that, you always put a semicolon at the end of your lines. That's because C# and Arduino, they don't care how you format the lines. Like usually people format them to make them nice and neat and be able to read them, but the compiler does not care how you have it formatted. It uses a symbol, a semicolon, that says that's the end of the line. Okay, I'm going to go to the next line. You could put a whole bunch of lines on a single line with a bunch of semicolons, and Arduino wouldn't care, right? Python cares. It doesn't use those. It doesn't use those symbols of an end of line symbol of a semicolon. It instead uses white spaces, which is a new line is a white space. A tab is a new white space. So it's what's called white space dependent. So you have to get your formatting correct, or it won't know where it is in the program, and it gets confused and throws up its hands and yells at you with red X's. Nothing works. Essentially just means make sure you put your damn tab in, and it'll be fine, right? So tab over, you want to be on the same tab as the return. There's some more tutorials I'm going to have you guys do this week that will look at the basics of Python, because we're going to go more into depth on Python next week when we actually put in the code, that logic that looks at whether you win or not. And so it'll be helpful to kind of understand some of what the Python is doing. This class is going to be light on Python, but we're getting a little bit more Python every week. So by the end of the class, I hope you'll be more comfortable and not be scared of Python. It's not as bad as you think. All right, so we just need to put in a definition here. First, so what we want to do is when it goes from on to off, when it goes from off to on, we want to create a random number and stick it into that timer's length parameter, right? So first we need to reference the timer operator, right? All these objects are called operators. So we have to say op, open parenthesis, single quote, the name of the operator, which is timer1, single quote, close parentheses. If you forget your single quote, it will get mad at you. Timer1. Someone moved the damn projector again. I need to move this up so that my head isn't blocking it. The other class loves to drop it down. I got a big head, so if I don't put it up high enough, you won't ever see anything. All right. Op timer1. Now we want to look at we're going into the parameters for timer1, so .par. This is something we did last week. And then we need to put the name of the parameter. So if I click on I got timer1 open. We're going to be referencing the length. We need to know what the Python name of that parameter is. It's not always the same as what's listed here in the parameter window, but you can always get what its Python name is by expanding it with this plus. And in this case, they're the same. It's just not capitalized, right? It's capitalized here. Don't capitalize it. It's .length. .par.length equals. And then we would set our random value. So now we need to calculate a random value. How would you do that? Well, you'd have to use some sort of function to create a random number, right? There's probably multiple different ways you can create a random number in Python. There's probably libraries that you could get from the internet that you could install into your Python version and make Touch Designer use those to generate a random number. But luckily, we don't need to do that because there are some utilities built into Touch Designer for Python that have this function. They're called Touch Designer Utilities. And it's TDU for Touch Designer Utilities. Is it capital? No, lowercase rand, R-A-N-D. That will create a random number, but you have to feed this random number generator a seed value. And that's going to be some sort of seed that's in between parentheses. So some seed here. You don't have to type this. I'm just showing you guys the seed. You will need to open and close parentheses. But the way random numbers work on computers, for the most part, is that they are what are called pseudo-random numbers. So they use, a computer can't just, because a computer has no imagination, it can't just pull a random number out of thin air. It needs some sort of math operation to generate a random number. A good example would be, I'm going to generate a random number by using the decimal places of the number pi, right? You can say, okay, pi is 3.141526. I don't know any more than that. But if I have to give it a seed number, what place number am I looking at in the number pi? So the seed, if I say the seed number is 4, then 3.141, my random number is 1. If I say I'm going to look at seed number 6, 3.14152, that's a 2. So those numbers, the relationship between the seed and the value returned is completely random. There's no, no, it's not random. The relationship between one returned random number and another returned random number is completely random. Like, there is no repeating pattern in the decimal places of pi. It's an irrational number. It goes on forever. It never repeats. But if you know what algorithm it's using to generate that random number, in this case pi, and what the seed is, you can calculate what the number is going to be, and it's going to be the same number every time. So we have to feed it a seed, and not only that, if we're generating more than one random number, we need to make sure that every seed that we're giving it is a different seed. Otherwise, it's going to give us the same random number every time, which will cause issues for us, right? So we need to give it some seed number that changes over time. That seed number can be incremental because there's no relationship in the between the random numbers generated by a seed and a seed plus 1 and a seed plus 2. Like 3.14152.6. I can give it seed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and get different random numbers every time, right? But I don't want to say, give me seed 3, give me seed 3, give me seed 3, because then I'm only getting a 2, 2,
So
2,
are we giving
2.
it a 0 through 9?
Well, we could do that, but then if we when it rolled back around, it would give us the same numbers over again, right? So we want it to always be a new incremental number. And there's a function called abs time that we can use. We can just use the amount of time that's elapsed since we started the patch. Abs time, and we can even say, and now you can say I want time in minutes, seconds. You can even do frames, and we're going to use frames. So that will give us 60 frames every second. Abs time dot frame. Okay.
Dot or just frame?
Sorry, let me zoom in here. ABS time dot frame. Okay. And that should give us a different random number. Now the way tdu.rand works is it gives you a random number between 0 and 1, a floating point value. So we're going to have to do some math to this to give us the kind of range we get, but let's go ahead and just see how it works right now. So you can see if I click on it, now that length is 0.19. If I click on it again, it's 0.82, it's 0.98. See, it's giving us different floating point value between 0 and 1 every time. Right?
Yep.
Then you did something wrong.
The values are still
They're still random. It's just a floating point between 0 and 1.
Integers, they're not decimals.
No, they're decimals.
Right, so
in this
they're not
case.
aligning quite right yet.
Right, so we just need to take this floating point value and multiply it by something to get it in the range that we want.
Uh-huh.
Right? Is your code working now?
Oh, yes, sorry.
So what should it be doing differently than before? Because I don't necessarily have any random numbers.
Your length value of your timer should be changing every time you click the button.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be the same.
It's always using the same?
Yeah.
Then you have something wrong with your seed. Go back into your code, zoom in on that shop exec. TDU ran abs time
There's spaces in between.
is timer 1.
It is timer 1.
And you called it what?
Time.
So change that to timer 1. No.
Oh.
When you were referencing that op, you called it timer.
Oh,
You
I
need
see.
to call it timer 1.
I understand.
So it wasn't sending that value to the right place. Yes.
No, it is.
So let's look at your code. You got something wrong. Scroll in. Okay, you have brackets instead of parentheses here on your op. You have braces instead of parentheses. Nope, those are brackets. You went from
Wait,
one
what's
wrong one to the
braces?
other wrong one.
Which one is
No, you don't want braces. You had braces. You want parentheses. Shift
Oh.
9 and shift 0.
it? Oh.
There you go. So parentheses are used for specifying the name of the operator. Brackets are only used, square brackets are only used when you're talking about a channel. And I'm not sure where braces are used, if they're used at all.
That's
Braces
all
are
because
those like squiggly ones.
That's all because of pen dash, right? Like order operation.
No, I'm just talking about in code.
Oh.
But yes, you do use parentheses in PEMDAS and in math operations. But we don't need to do that right now. Okay, so now we got that. It's creating a random. How are you doing? Here. Woo! All right, you good? Okay, cool. All right, so every time we hit the button, we get a different value between 0 and 1. And never, it looks like never 0 and never 1, really. But that's okay. What we want to do now is figure out what, we obviously don't want this timer to be less than 1 second, because that would be like the wheel starts and immediately stops, right? So we need to figure out what we want it to do. We definitely probably want it to be more than a second. We want it to spin a little bit before it stops. I'd say we want it to go for at least like 3 seconds.
3 to 5 seconds.
Yeah, maybe 3 to 5. I liked 3 to 8 seconds. That was what I have in my notes. So first of all, you could add 3 to it. So I could take this time and add 3 plus 3. And that means it will always give me a time of at least 3 seconds. But right now it'll be somewhere between 3 and 4 seconds, right? So what do I have to add to 3? What's the range I'm actually looking for? If I want to go from between 3 and 8 seconds, what's the difference between 3 and 8?
5.
5, right? So if I take this number between 0 and 1 and I want it to go between 0 and 5, what would I do to it? No, we already added 3. This part here, this TDU rand frame is going to give me a number between 0 and 1. I want it to give me a number between 0 and 5. What do I do to it? Multiply by 5, right? So I can say times 5 plus 3. Then it will give me a number between 3 and 8, right? Because if it gives me a 0, then 0 times 5 is 0 plus 3 is 3. If it gives me a 5, then if it gives me a 1, then 1 times 5 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So then it creates that range, right?
Perfect. I just tried mine. It rolled somewhere between 5 and 8 seconds.
Yeah. So now if you look at your length here, I got 0.6, I got 6 seconds, I got 3 seconds, I got 6, I got 4, I got 5. You get random times for each thing. And if we take a look at our viewer, we should be able to roll it, and it should roll and stop. Stop on a 2. Okay? That's half of the equation. The other half is we want it to have a randomized speed, just because we want it to be extra random. We could probably get away with just having a random timer, but why not make it both a random timer and a random speed? Yes, question?
Every time, although my numbers are randomized now, it seems as though like my length is not being affected by, or there's no effect when I use my button. Which is weird.
So you're hitting the button and it's not doing anything?
Yeah, it's not doing anything within the parameters of timing, within the length parameter.
Okay, so how are you getting it to work before? Or is it just when you're hitting the button here on the graphic? Or when you're hitting the button in your editor?
Yeah, and no, it's just it's the editor. Is this actually just a good?
So is your viewer active on your button?
Yeah, the viewer is active.
And when you click the button there, it's not doing anything? Let me take a look.
That's the thing, is it's doing overall in the equation. It's doing.
All right, hold on. All right, so that seems to be working. What's going on? Hit it again.
Basically, the only difference that I noticed between ours.
All right, so it's not going long enough. You got your math. You didn't put it in the math. Didn't plug in the math or something. No, not that math. Go into your chop exec. Scroll down. Zoom in. There we go. Times. Oh, that's right. Oh, okay. So you gotta have that times. Okay, so what you're doing is you're saying that abs time times 5 plus 3 is the seed number. Yeah. You want the parentheses to be after dot frame, and then taking that random value that is generated and multiplying it by 5 and adding 3.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're just changing the seed number instead of changing the return result. I get rid of that trailing parentheses that you don't need. Does that make sense what
Yeah.
you were doing there? Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that makes sense.
Yeah. On line 12, that just means that something on line 11 wasn't working right. So you have length spelled wrong. It can't return if the previous line doesn't work. Yeah. Wait, you shouldn't be referencing. You should be that chop that you're referencing on the chop execute should be not the where's button start? Show me button start. Oh, you named it. Yeah, that works, right? It's working. So this is when buttons start, when everybody else is a null, but when that goes, this means that the chop execute is looking at that operator. Then you need to make sure that the on to off is turned on, which you did. And then, so when it goes from off to on, so when the button start has a value that goes from 0 to 1, then execute this code. No, actually it does. It means that has to be either a 0 or a 1. If you sent it a 0.1, a 0.5, it wouldn't do anything. It has to go from off to on. TDU.rand will always create a random number between 0 and 1. Then you're feeding it a seed that's being generated by your abs time, so that it's a different seed number every second, every frame. And then you're taking that number that's returned from 0 to 1, multiplying it by 5, and adding 3. You already got it working. Don't add any. Oh, you just want to do it now. All right. So that works. We want to add randomized speed. So first thing is we need to have a place to hold our random speed. And you would think it would be a null, but nulls will only take an input value. You can't set them as a value. I can't say in my code here, set null2 to be 1. It's not gonna listen. Null2 only gets its input from what's patched into it, right? So we need an operator that you can actually set to a value that we're going to use as random speed. And it's similar to a null, but it's a constant.
Good job.
It's a constant chop. Go ahead and name this constant random speed. In camel caps, I'm using a lowercase r and then a capital S. All one word, random speed. And this, it holds a value just like a null does, but it also, you can set that value to be whatever you want, right? Okay.
Oh yeah, what are the different categories? 0, 10, 20.
So
30,
right now, this slider only goes from 0 to 1, but
Okay.
it can take anything. I can I can type in a -5 if I want,
Right.
or I can type in a 200 if I want.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, okay? So for now, I'm going to put it back to a 1. All right. What do I do? I want to, on my chop execute, which is where we're generating the other random number, we want to generate a random number and send it to the speed value. So we need to reference the same sort of thing. Let's just go ahead and copy, let's go ahead and make your viewer active. Copy this line here.
From op all the way.
Yeah, that whole line, op timer 1 par length times 5 plus 3.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead and paste it so you have it twice. And change where it says timer 1 here. We're going to look at a different operator. We're going to look at random speed. We're going to need to change what parameter we're affecting on random speed. It doesn't have a parameter called length. It has channel 1 here, which has 2 parameters. It has the name, which is channel 1, which we don't really care about what its name is, but what we do care about is its value. And so it is value 0, right? This next channel would be value 1. The next one after that would be value 2, and so on, just counting from 0 up.
So instead of length, you put in value.
Value 0, exactly. So value 0, all one word, TDU, abstime.frame, and then we probably want a different ranging and offset, right? So we want some speed greater than 0, right? We don't want it to not move at the beginning. We don't want it to be so slow that it's boring or somebody thinks that it's broken. And we don't want it to be so fast that you can't see the numbers going by, that it's just a blur. Because then if you can see the numbers, then you can get excited about what numbers are coming up, right? So let's take a look real quick about so open up your viewer here and manually change your LFO's frequency here. Can I just do it? Yeah, if I just drag this. So that's kind of slow. 0.27 is a little bit better. 0.3 is pretty good. But I think 0.5 is probably a good slow speed, right? And then what's the fastest we want it to go? Well, if I go 1.6 or 1.7, that's just too fast for me, right?
Maybe just 1. Just
1. I like between 0.5 and 1. That's kind of the ideal range, because at 1.0, it's going really fast, but I can still see the numbers rolling by, right? So I want to set that random speed. Go ahead and change this back to your expression flag here, and it should stop. Okay. So we are dragging this this frequency here, which changed it.
LFO, right?
Yeah, on the LFO, we were dragging this frequency, which changed it to a constant. If you click back on the blue expression flag, it should go back to what we had before.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to close my viewer here. All right. So we got our operator random speed, which is this constant down here. .par.value 0 equals time tdu.rand abstime.frame. We don't want to multiply it by 5 and add 3, because that would be super fast to ultra fast, and we don't want that. We want it to instead be a value that goes between a value that goes between 0.5 and 1. So how would I massage this data? What kind of math operations would I do? Same sort of thing that we did here, but change it. So first we start with an offset. We want it to go to at least be what? 0.5, right? So plus 0.5. But before that, we need that range. So starting at 0.5, what's the difference between 0.5 and 1?
0.5.
0.5. So then we want it to, instead of generating a number between 0 and 1, we want it to generate a number between
0.5 and 1?
No, well, it's only going to generate a number between 0 and something. That range, that difference between 0.5 and 1 is what? 0.5, we said, right?
Yeah.
So how do we take a number that goes between 0 and 1 and change it to a number that goes between 0 and 0.5?
Divide by 2.
Divide by 2 or multiply by 0.5, right? Multiplying by 0.5 is the same as dividing by 2. So you could say divide by 2. I'm going to say times 0.5 because that's what I did in my notes. I don't want to confuse myself. So times 0.5 plus 0.5 should give me a value that goes between 0.5 and 1 into that random speed. It's not going to do anything yet, but you should see it pop up in this random speed. When I hit my button, there you go, 0.9, that should be fast. 0.6, 0.8, 0.8, 0.9, 0.5, right?
Wait, something happened to me again where I'm not rendering. Maybe.
You got broken stuff. What do you got?
Yeah, I know, something. Whatever I just did caused errors over here.
What's this? Click on that. Not enough sources. Project 1 math. What did you do? When did it happen? Just now?
Immediately when I put in the new code.
Go back into the code. Zoom in on it.
I'm trying.
Scroll over. Randomness. Is that what you named your thing?
Yeah, random speed.
Okay, you just called it randomness?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Got part of it by TDU time frame. Times 0.5. That looks right. Try just an undo. What happens when you do an undo? Control Command Z. And scroll out. Did it get rid of your errors? No, it didn't. What's going in wheel flip here? That's saying unsupported operand for none type and int. What did you do?
Because I didn't click anything.
Uh,
I had it all perfect. My thing was in there.
all right. Well,
Maybe because this
disregarding
thing stopped
this-
rendering.
no,
The
that's a
wheel?
light. That's a light. But
Oh.
anyway, is it working? Yeah, it's working. So that's working. It's just something over here, bro. Not sure.
No, I
what
think
did.
it
You
has
must
to
have
do with
dragged
this.
something. Oh, right, rotate. Something happened with rotate here. Operator null 1, channel 0 times -36.
And rotate used to be a
So
negative
do you
288.
wait? No, but it's looking for null 1. Where's null 1? Looks like you might have
over here.
deleted null 1.
Oh, null 2. There was a null 1 over here.
Yeah, you deleted it.
Where should it be connected to? Oh, there's no 1 right there.
From range. Wait, so something was attached to this. Your LFO. Where's your LFO? You deleted something that you weren't supposed to
My
delete.
LFO is still here.
Where's your LFO? So that's what happened. You broke your LFO. It's gone.
Yeah, I must have. So
So
how do I get that back and reconnect?
well, it had code in it also.
No.
Just undo until it comes back. There it is.
There we go. Okay. And then I'm back in here,
Yeah,
and now
fix
I need
your code
to
in
fix
there.
my code in here. Make sure that that does not happen again.
Yeah.
Should I still be selected on my LFO, or should I be selected on my button?
Well, you want to change your code, so yeah.
My code window is like I couldn't.
What do you mean? You can't click in it?
What was the code again? Plus -5 times.
So try zooming out until it pops out of the program, pops out of this. Now try going back into it. You can't drag it. Change the viewer active on it. Does it not let you? All right, then save and close and reopen.
Save as or save?
No, you can save. Just save.
And the code was times -0.5 plus 0.5, right?
Yeah.
Great. It's
No,
working.
times 0.5 plus 0.5.
Next one.
Yeah.
Use one.
Right. Where is click on the thing?
LFO is still there. And
So
it's
it
still
says look
working.
at line 12, line
Perfect. I
13.
got a number 1.
Cannot
Yeah,
find
sure.
function named on value change.
There you go.
Okay, define on off.
Oh, there's only two
On
operators.
part
That's
length.
Yeah.
We got rid of the
You
last one.
copy and paste.
Times 5 plus 3
Add three.
times 0.5 plus 3. Let's try this. Let's. Whoops. Let's see. Let's. How do I control X? Why is that not working? Well, let's cut it. I want to cut it and then undo. And now, okay, so that reset that. And now what happens when I hit the go button? Does it break it? Yes. So something is messed up in your code. Do you not have an operator called random speed? You do. Is it called the same thing as your comment? Random speed. Random speed. You not have an op called timer 1. You do. Okay. So then the next thing. let's try this. I have a feeling these look right. So it might have messed up something else. So let me make this active. And let's copy these two lines. No, let's make them new. I want to delete this. Can you delete it? Make me a new one. Make a new topic. Okay. And go ahead and go inside of it. Make it active. Add a line before the return. Paste in the code that I tab over. Paste in the code. Okay. Go ahead and turn on, off to on, and turn off value. Whoops, right there. Off to on, turn off value change. Okay, try it now. Works. Okay. Move it over. I want to see if I can't see if there's a red X there. There we go. Hit the button. So there was something else here that you had accidentally changed. Yeah. Oh, is it not doing anything though? You have to tell it what chop to look at. That's why. So put in null too. Okay, now try it again. Make sure it doesn't break. Ah, it broke. Okay. Use of tabs and spaces. So did you use a tab there or spaces? So yeah, that's a tab. So that's the problem, is that you got a disagreement between tabs and spaces. So is this one? Oh, see, there's an extra space there. I've deleted this tab. There's an extra space. So now go ahead and put the tabs back. Tabs back. We had a tab space on that. Now it should work. Try it again. Okay. All right. Yeah, you got to be real, because it's white space dependent. You can't put extra white spaces in, or it gets mad at you, right? Yeah. I'm getting my steps in today.
You certainly are.
But you don't have your phone on you, so it doesn't count.
I should have worn my Fitbit. You have something on, you have that disabled for some reason. Yeah, like that. That means it's looking at the first channel of that chop. Instead of referencing it by name, it's looking at the first channel. And since the number's from 0 up, then if you have the 2 channels and you wanted to look at the second one, you'd put a 1 there instead of a 0. Then you'd put a 2 there instead of a 3, instead of a 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 5th channel would be a 4. It's an index number. It's an index number. So you can specify a channel either by its name, which is a name that between single quotes, and that's whatever the name is, or you can specify it by index number. We are using index number in this case, and it counts from 0 up. So the first channel is 0, the second channel is 1, third channel is 2.
That's what we see in the data table, right? That's
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if we do the export method like that table by name and by index, that would affect how we program our code. Sometimes
you can just leave it. I think by default it usually references things by name. When I drag things in there and I say make a chop reference, it usually references that channel by name. But a lot of times you want to change it to index number because you want to do math to it. You want to say this index plus 1, right? So instead of looking at this channel, I want to take the number that you're giving to me and look at the next channel. There's no way to add 1 to channel 1, right? So, or if your channel is called banana, there's no such thing as banana plus 1, but there is something called index plus, index 0 plus 1 is index 1, right? So that's why sometimes you do it by index number instead of name, right? So that you can do those kind of math operations. Okay. Whew! All right, it's 2:30. Okay, so we have our random speed. We haven't done anything with it yet. What we want to do is somehow assign this random speed to our LFO. And of course, we could just plug it in there. But to save time, I'm going to skip ahead to what we're going to ultimately end up doing on this thing, which is creating an envelope. Amy, what's an envelope? How do you explain an envelope? An envelope is like a curve to the data that you can increment over time. So you can pre-program some sort of curve and you say, okay, trigger this envelope now, which is like you can set up what that taper is going to be. Like it tapers in or it tapers out. Or maybe your envelope goes up and down and you say, okay, trigger that envelope and it goes through and does its thing. Or you can say, go to 50% through that envelope and it gives me this thing, right? We're going to set up that envelope using a trigger chop. And we're going to mostly using it for triggering a tail out effect to the speed. Okay, so create a trigger. And on this trigger, we are going to be mostly working with the sustain. Yeah, the sustain tab. Because this is where we do a decay shape. Because the sustain, you would think decay should have its own tab, and it doesn't. I would think that attack, decay, and sustain should all be their own tabs. But for whatever reason, they stick decay in sustain tab. Okay? Yeah. So we're mostly working with a decay shape here. A decay is how a value tails off, how it fades itself out, right? We're actually going to not really use the attack at all. So in order to bypass the attack, we want to set the attack length here to 0. We can leave the peak level to 1, but we want to change the peak length to 0 as well. And that will just not do attacking at all. Attack is kind of the opposite of decay. So when it goes to this value, how long does it take to go to that value? How does it fade up? We're going to mostly deal with fading down. Because that peak, if it was going to peak and sustain at some level and then tail out, I would have to choose what peak level to go to. And I just don't even want to deal with that. I'm just going to deal with the sustain level. And on sustain, we want to have a decay length. How long do we want this to tail out for? Let's make it 2 seconds. And the decay shape, ease in and ease out, is fine. Let's leave that alone. Sustain level, for now, let's set that to 0. Later, probably next week, or actually I think probably in that online video that I'm going to assign you guys, we'll adjust this sustain level. We're going to use it to, right now the numbers can stop with the wheel not centered. We're going to use that sustain level to, after it slows down, it'll sustain at a really slow speed until it gets perfectly centered and then cut off. But for now, let's set it to 0. And you can leave the rest alone. The release length, that doesn't matter for what we're doing. Okay, so what this is going to do, this trigger, if I go to trigger and I click this pulse, you'll see that it creates a value that starts at 1 and then tails off to 0. And that's what we're going to use to create our kind of fade out thing. And let's see, we need to, what do we need to do with this?
Don't they need to be connected to the low frequency operator?
We have a, what? Yeah, well, essentially, but we actually need Yes, that will be connected essentially, but we need to have this random speed set of a frequency, and then when it's done, then let me look at my picture really quick. Okay, so coming out of the done goes to the trigger. So this channel done, patch that into the trigger. Go ahead and hit your button, and you'll see that when that done goes to 1, it'll make that trigger go up to 1 and then tail down to 0. Right? Now what we want it to do is control the LFO's rate. Right now we're doing that here, the LFO's frequency. Right now we're simply doing that with the select. Instead, which is only going to be I thought this was some random value. Right now it's only going to 1. Oh, right. For now it's only going to 1, right? Because we haven't done our random speed yet. Right? So instead of only being 1 or 0, we want it to only be the random speed or 0. But really we want it to be only the random speed up until the thing ends, and then do this tail out trigger value. Right? So we need this tail out trigger value to be ranged, instead of going from 1 to 0 as it's doing right now, we need it to go to whatever is in the random speed to 0. So we can do that with a math object. So, and do some ranging. So add a math object to the back end of this.
To the trigger?
To the trigger. And just go to the range tab. And right now it's set for from 0 to 1, map that to range from 0 to 1. And what we want it to do is from 0 to 1, map that to the range from 0 to whatever is in random speed.
I'm sorry, but math is a chop again, right?
Yeah, math chop, yeah. So how would I do that? I can make my viewer active on random speed and drag it into this to range and make a chop reference. And now,
so you dragged from
random speed into this math to range on the range tab of math.
Right, got it. Range.
So,
range.
Yeah.
Okay, to the first of the second column.
Right here, yeah.
Okay, and you made the viewer active on random.
Yeah.
And then drag that.
Yeah. So now this will make that tail out.
Was that a chop reference or chop export?
Chop reference, just because that's the one I like. In this one, it wouldn't really matter which one, because I don't think we'll be doing any additional math to it. But from now on, I always use chop references, just because I like to be consistent and they're more flexible.
Can you show me the Python code section of that? Because it's not channel 1.
It should let you drag if you made your viewer active. Well, then you lose. Your computer doesn't like you then. I don't know what to tell you. You should be able to drag it. Yes?
Now that I have this, every time I press the button, it only has 3 possible outcomes. It's either 8, 1, or 4.
I don't even know where to start with that.
It's really weird.
8, 1, or 4? It's probably a seed issue. I don't know. We have 7 minutes, so I'll look at it in 7 minutes. How about that? All right. So now we have the speed. We have the tail out. But right now, we're not using either of them in the LFO here. We're only using it before we even get to that stuff, right? So we need to change where the LFO is getting its frequency. But we have 2 different things right now. We have 2 different things that are vying for control of this LFO's frequency. So how could we make both of these control the LFO? Well, there's 2 different ways you could do it. You could probably do it with math, where you're taking the LFO's, the random speed value, and multiplying it by this math thing. So because as this tails down to 0, it would take that random speed and eventually multiplying it by 0. But we're doing some other stuff that will break that further down the line. So just to keep it simple, I'll do the other option, which is to use a operator called override, which basically just takes whatever data came into it last, whatever the most recent data that comes into override, that's what it spits out. So you can put as many channels into it as you want, and whoever is the last one to talk is the last one that it spits out. So it's a first in, first out, last in, last out, first in, first out object. So right now I have this override, and I have random speed going into it. I can also put the output from this math into it. And you can see that when I click the button, it gives me the random speed, and then when the math starts generating its number, you can see it starts with that random speed and then tails down to 0. And that's exactly what we want, right?
I think so. Yeah, it tails down to 0.
Yeah. Okay. And just because we're out of time, I would have you hook this up and then keep going, but I'm going to go ahead and skip a step, skip an instructional step, and instead just give you the answer. Now we just want one other thing that kind of we've dealt with the tail out, but we want to add a little object that'll help with that ramping up. And there's an object called lag that just kind of smooths out rapidly changing values. So instead of going from 0 straight to 0.5 or from 0 straight to 0.9, it does a small ramp up. So coming out of the override, going to a lag object.
Why does it want to connect to my random also?
What? The override is connected to both.
The lag, though, wants to connect.
Oh, you must have right-clicked on the wrong thing. Just delete that. All right.
And then I was going into here.
Wait, you have two things patched into your override. Wait, what do you have going on there? Yeah, you have something. There should only be one output from your random speed. You have it going something weird. I'll look at it in just a second.
Okay, thank you.
The override should have that the IFO.
What?
The override should have that the random speed and the IFO.
And no, and this math. Here, let me rearrange some things to make it more clear. Let me drag all of this stuff over. Okay, so coming out of the override, I have a math that, I have this random speed. Stop it. I have random speed kind of at the same place, and then as this math, and they're both going into this override, and then override is feeding into lag, and then LFO feeds into a different math object,
Okay, I
which
got
is
mine
feeding
working
into a
now.
different
Lag.
null. Does that make sense? You can just use the default settings on your lag.
Not enough sources specified.
Then you don't have anything patched into it.
I was able to figure it out and get my lag to connect to just the override.
Okay, so now instead, let's have this lag go to, do I have it go to a null? No, not really. Okay, so instead of here on this frequency now, instead of selecting this thing, just reference this lag 1. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that in here and say create a chop reference. And that should, and you shouldn't have to do a 1 minus or anything. You could, now that we've got all that set up correctly, we should just be able to patch that into the LFO's frequency input. And now when I hit the button, it ramps up to some speed value, goes for some random amount of time, and then ramps down. So do you have the lag creating the correct value? Yeah, you're going to send that into LFO's frequency.
Okay.
Okay? it should be coming out of the override into your lag 1. So it's whatever is in the override, which is going to be a random amount.
Alright,
Now that I've done that, it doesn't turn.
Well, it wasn't turning before anyway. You can only get 8, 3, and 1.
Yeah, it was at least spinning.
Okay, I'll look at it in just a second. We're at time anyway. Okay, so now would be the time to encapsulate all of this into a container. Let's go ahead and do that really quick. I know we're over time, but this will only take 1 minute. So go ahead and select, starting with the null. You leave your button out for now, but grab all of this stuff going to this everything but this last null here. So everything except for the last null and except for the button going into your wheel 1. So grab all that stuff. Not the wheels, none of your geometry objects, keep those out. Okay, where I'm gonna cut these. Oh my God, I destroyed my whole patch. That's all right, we'll fix it here in a second. You're cutting it so you can always paste it. Now make a container comp and call this container spinner1. Spinner1. Okay. Now zoom it. Now go inside your spinner1 and paste it back in there. And now it's like this null 2 is broken because it doesn't know what its input value is. So create an input chop. In. It's just called an in. And patch that into null 2, this first null object. And then coming out of this math, patch that to an output chop. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Coming out of this math, go to an out chop. Okay, so now we've created an in and an out into this container. And then we just need to connect the button to the spinner and the output of the spinner back to our null down here that our wheel is attached to. And now we're ready to copy this 3 times to get our 3 wheels. So it might, when you did that, it probably broke it and it's spinning nonstop, but if you go ahead and click the button, it should spin and then stop. Yeah, is mine broken? Mine's not stopping. There we go, it did that time. Okay. Whoops, that's the button. All it is everything you had. It's nothing, and an input and an output chop. So you want to select everything coming out of that button before the null that's going into the wheel. Input in. You need an in and an out. In. If you start typing, it's easier to find it.
I don't know,
patch
man.
from the in to that first null.
I haven't even gotten my stuff
Now
into a container.
coming out of
Yeah.
the math to a null. I mean to a
Yeah.
chop.
Right now, my override is giving me a simple endangered symbol, so I'm
Yep, coming out of that to the out.
asking about that.
Now zoom out. Wait, what's going on? Your lag, is that getting sent to your,
No, that's.
so in your LFO, you gotta change the go to your LFO settings. It's clicking wildly, you gotta click on the LFO. I don't know, there you go, click on it, there we go. Change to frequency, change to, click on the blue flag on your frequency, there we go. So you need to change that done, so make viewer active on your lag. Drag it into that, yep. Chop reference. There you go.
Wasn't working here, but the person, like it works in here, but it doesn't really work in here.
Do you have more than one button? Then go into your button real quick. The parameters, sorry, go to the parameters for your button. And change, make it unactive. Click on it once. Go to layout. depth layer, make that depth layer be something greater than 0. Jackson, depth layer greater than 0.
Can you help me with one thing before we go?
And now it should work, right?
Oh, it did.
All right. What else? Who else needs help before
Just
we go?
me. Just me.
Yeah. So where's the container that you just made? Oh, so did you create? Yeah, just drag a thing from the out. You need to go inside the spinner. Is that an in chop? You should be able to put it in there. On this. Whatever, scroll out. Let's try sending your button to a null. Now try connecting your null. I don't know what's going on there. Why won't that input? Then you got something else wrong. Go inside your spinner real quick. Let's try to figure out what's wrong. Just delete that. Delete that in. Delete it. Make a new in. Scroll out. Try patching into it again. Hey, that should work. I don't know. This is a chop. It's a comp. This is a comp, right? Yeah, it's a comp with a chop input. There's a chop out. See, that's green, green, green. They should all be able to talk to each other.
Jackson, I'll just set up a meeting with you because all I need to do is fix whatever's going on here.
Oh, well,
and then
that's easy. Let's
Okay.
fix that real quick.
fix that real quick.
All
and then I
right,
need to
so
put it into-
let's move this thing so that we can see what's going on. There we go. So you have it in an infinite loop here.
Okay.
So you don't want this input. So break this command. This gets This is set by code. There's nothing going into it. That should do it.
Thank you so much. And then how do I select all of the stuff to put it into the?
Oh, so
But we can always do that when we meet.
yeah, so you select the first one that you want,
No.
and then you drag a box around everything else that you want by doing a hold down shift and drag a box around. I got too much. So let's see if I can get it. There we go. That should.
You don't want that to do that one. You just want everything besides null one.
Yeah, right before null.
Yeah. Okay.
All this
And then
stuff.
How do I put that into a container?
So go ahead and control cut it.
Okay.
Create your container.
It should be
Container. And call this spinner 1. And now go in here and paste it. And now you just need
Now I just
an
the-
input and an output.
From what to what?
From the input is in the null 2 there.
So I find
Before
that.
that, put an in chop.
This?
Yep. And patch into the null 2. And then the very last thing, I think it's like a math or a lag or something.
Over here?
Where don't you have a lag?
Yeah, lag one down
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the lag.
here. Okay.
So coming out of the lag, going to an out. Start typing out.
Yeah. That was
There it is. All right, and then connect those two. You know, and also if you right click on the one that you want to connect it to, it'll automatically connect.
I work much better with my mouse, which I forgot today.
Okay.
So it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
me
yeah.
trying to.
All right, so now scroll out of this.
Okay. Because
Pop
now,
out.
now it's no longer.
Yeah, pop out of this. All right, now now connect your button. Go out of active. Drag that to the input. Come out of the input of the spinner 1.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry, out of the output of the spinner 1.
Uh-huh.
Zoom out a little bit so we can see more stuff. And go into. Oh, you know what it was? No, there's a null. Yeah, connect it to that null. There you go.
Perfect. Oh my God! Thank you so much.
What's up?
I'm almost there too. How do you cut? Command what?
Command X. Never done a cut
Oh.
before.
No, I usually just cut manually. That's
Oh.
yeah.
Okay, so now make your container comp. Container. Okay, name it spinner 1. Spinner 1.
Thank you so much, Jackson.
Yeah. So you got. I'll send you an email reminding you. But your homework is to do this online tutorial that I'll post on the website, and also to do these other Matthew Reagan Python tutorials. There's just 2 of them. Okay. I'll send you guys an email with the details. Okay. So now go inside spinner 1. And paste them. There you go. Now you're going to need an input and an output right before your first object, which is that null 2. You need an input. It's called in, I guess. And then coming out of the flag, I believe it's okay, and then stop out of this and connect your button into that input. And now out of the output into the null before your that red null that's all in.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And what times are you available tomorrow?
I'm available between 10 and noon, and then after 1 till about 4.
10 noon,
Yeah,
1, 4.
Yeah.
Okay. And then can I actually take a couple notes on where your thing is, or where your
Yeah. So, do you know where the E-block elevator is? Down the elevator that's that way.
yeah.
So you take that elevator up to the 4th floor.
Yeah.
Then
E-block.
E-block elevator, right by the the dance school and the theater school offices.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Near dance.
Yeah. I mean that's on the 1st floor. Yeah. You can take it from the 3rd floor too. It's right by the scene shop on the 3rd floor.
Okay. I'll just go first for reference point.
Yeah. You go all the way up to the 4th floor. Then when you come out of the elevator, you'll turn to your right, and you'll walk around the corner, and then you'll be kind of in the hallway between the E400 and E407 and the backstage area of the mod. There'll be 3 doors that go into the backstage area of the mod theater.
Yeah, totally.
So take the
Those are
third.
push doors?
Yeah, they're like double doors.
Yeah.
So take the 3rd door because that's the one that's always unlocked, and go through there. The door handle itself might be kind of like locked, but if you just pull it open, there's no way for those doors to actually lock.
Yeah,
They
totally.
refuse to fix them.
Totally.
So go that. You'll be backstage of the mod then. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're backstage of the mod, and you're close to that. You're actually really close to the backstage stairway. It's just around the corner.
Yeah.
Take the backstage stairway up 2 flights, flight and a half, and then you'll be on the 6th floor. And you'll see like a broken drinking fountain at the top of that.
Yeah.
And right next to the broken drinking fountain, that's my hallway.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you go through there, I'm right at the end of the hall.
Totally.
Yeah. And that door is automatically unlocked from like 10 a.m. to like 6 p.m.
Totally.
But if it is locked, just knock on it and I'll hear you.
Totally.
Or send me a text if you get lost.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Nice, solid.